Hey everybody, welcome back to the SOLIDWORKS Electrical Implementation video series. This video, we're going to talk about creating our schematics, actually getting into a little bit of the design functionality of this tool. So I have two projects open on the left-hand side here, one of which is completed and the other is the one we've been working with throughout this series. And the first thing we want to do when we're getting ready to start a new project is figure out what components we want and the information we're going to include in those components. So in the case of, I have my sheet here that we were working with. I'm actually going to get rid of those because we're going to draw some symbols out here in a minute. When we add components to our component tree, if you remember from the manufacturer part, there's a lot of different ways that we can represent that one particular manufacturer part, which it can then be associated to the component. So in the case of this first project I have open, we take a look at this filter I have here. I have 4 different representations in this project for that filter. I have the cabinet layout, which is that blue circle. I have a black box for my line diagram. I have a schematic symbol as the basic EMI filter for it. And I even have a 3D model on the 3D space associated to this. So when I look at my component tree, I can see all the different levels of information that I can capture for this one component. So let's go ahead and actually start building in a component. And what does it take to actually add this component to our project? So I'm going to just start with a connector. I could use the insert connector, dynamic connector tool, or the insert symbol. And I'm going to go ahead and find the appropriate symbol. In this case here, I'm just going to find an 8-pin symbol. And I'm going to have it snap to my grid. If you noticed on the bottom right corner, there are a few buttons that I can turn on or off the grid, the ortho and snap. I did mention in a previous video, I personally like to keep my grid and snap spacing the same. You don't have to. That's just what I like to do. That way, when I do it, I can snap to the grid very easily. So now that I've added this connector, in this particular case, the symbol is automatically set to be a J or a P or a CN, whatever you want it to be. In my case, I have it set to J. And so I have information about the component itself, about this symbol. What is the description for this? Maybe it's for power. Maybe it's for comms. Is there any other information I want to assign? What is this part being used for? I can also manually override this particular symbol and add my own root and mark to it as well. Is it a permanent component, which allows you to add, what will happen is we'll add this infinity symbol next to the component in your component tree, and it's essentially an extra layer of protection so that way you can't delete that part. What happens is if I have J1 and I drop it into my project and then I delete that symbol out, then it will delete the component from my component tree. By having this checked on, it will not delete it from my component tree. It's the extra layer. I have to go to my component tree and select delete, and it will give me a pop-up. Are you sure you want to delete this? So on and so forth. You can set your locations. You can set a configuration if you're using the dynamic connector. But once you have this set up, now you can go in and define what part you want to use for that. And in this case here, you can either create one from scratch or you can search. So I'm going to go ahead and search. In this case here, I'm going to go ahead and look for a Molex connector. And I have this connector here. So in order to add this down, I'll do that again because I think I went kind of quick. I'm going to either double click to add it, or I'm going to select it and hit the green checkbox. And it will add that part to this component. As soon as I hit select, it will add it to this component. Now, this is, if we could see here under type, this is a base component. Well, this is just the housing for this Molex connector. But in reality, I probably need to also include the pins. Depending on your vendor, you may need to go and get the pins as well. And because it's an 8-pin connector, I'm going to go ahead and select this. I'll make it 8. And just like that, I have a total of 9 components or 9 parts that are associated to this one component. So this is really valuable in the fact that maybe I have a circular connector and it has a housing and it has a back shell and it has 2 different types of pins and maybe a 45-degree back shell and a piece of heat shrink. I can include all of that stuff inside of this part. And now when I'm ready to later on, remember our report configurations, I can organize this based off of the type of parts. And in this case here, maybe I want to organize all my reports to be manufacturer, and I'll get a list of all the Molex parts. So now I have my Molex connector with my pins. And if I look at my component tree, I can find J1 and I have that one instance of that symbol inside my project. When I add a component to this particular part, I also have the ability to create an electrical assembly. I covered this very briefly in the manufacturer part library video. What this does is it allows me to take all of these parts, multiple parts, and turn them into something, an electrical assembly that I would need to assign its own part number to. So if I have my own internal part number, then I can assign it. And that way, every time I use that assembly, it's automatically going to bring in all of these parts. I don't have to go through the repeated process of add the base, add the auxiliary, add the accessory, so on and so forth. So you do have the ability to add multiple to this electrical assembly. So I'm going to repeat this step, and I'm going to add another connector to the other side. So now I have J1 and I have P1, and we are ready to add wires. So now when I'm ready to add my wires, I'm simply going to go to either draw multiple wires and draw single wires. Drawing multiple wires, I've already set up wire styles that are essentially a group within a group of specific wire types that I want to call out because I use these a lot for more of like the supply power, things like that. But for inside of a cabinet or inside of a chassis, I'm typically using single wire styles. So I have that ability as well. In this case here, I'm going to go ahead and just draw a single wire. You can space the wires out depending on how many you have. In this case here, I have 8 cores. I'm just going to use this one wire style for every one. You do have the ability, like I said, to space out the space between each one of these. And just like that, I now have 8 wires. If I ever want to go in and change these wire styles, I can always, of course, go in and delete this, or I have the ability to go in and replace this wire style, and it will give me the option of choosing a new wire style in my project. Now that I've gone ahead and I've added my or changed my wire style here, I want to add the naming convention for these wires. So under the process tab, I'm very simply going to go ahead and select new wires, and it's going to run through the system top to bottom, left to right, from page 1 all the way through, and it's going to add my numbering scheme. In this case here, obviously it's very generic, but again, as I mentioned in the previous video about wire styles and the formulas in there, you can be as unique as you need to be for these wire styles. If I absolutely wanted to, I can change the wire style, the wire numbering convention based off of the sheet and the row or the column of where that falls on the page as necessary. Under the projects tab, if I want to kind of clean this up a little bit and maybe change the size of these or bring them a little closer to the actual line so they're not overlapping like they are, I would want to come to my projects, configurations, project manager, and find the appropriate location for that and change the graphical representation for it. So now that I have my 2 connectors and my wires set up, we have a few more steps we're going to do. I'm going to break this off. I'm going to start up another video. Some people would like to see this section, take a break, and then jump into another video here pertaining to cabling, harnessing, and even creating macros. So I hope this video helps get you started with just dropping in a few symbols, adding wires to those symbols. And thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.